So I had a bit of a mishap this morning and managed to roll that canoe while driving it with this motor on it. And I drowned my beloved 4-stroke Yamaha, which is really kind of our main workhorse here at the station. So I really need to get this thing running right away. I was at one of our study sites and was chasing a turtle and made a corner too sharp and rolled the boat. In my defense, it was a really important turtle for our research. And I'll put the full story at the end of this video. But if you're watching this, I'm guessing it's because you've done something similar and really just want to know how to save your beloved motor. So I won't waste your time up front with my tales of woe. The good news is that if you have drowned your motor like I have, a lot of the time it is actually quite easy to save them using very simple tools. We're just going to use some sockets, screwdrivers, and good old WD-40. There's really two critical factors that are going to determine whether your motor is salvageable. The first is whether the motor was running when you went into the water. As a motor works, the piston moves up and down, and when it's moving up, it's actually compressing the gas and the air mixture, and then that sparks and pushes the cylinder back down. That works great because air is compressible, but water is not compressible, and so if you run water into a running motor, when that piston tries to come up, it's got nowhere to go because the water's not compressible, and that's when you're going to snap a rod or break a head or do all sorts of bad things to your motor. So that's a first consideration for whether or not the motor can be saved. The second is how long you waited to work on it. Once water gets in there, it can really start corroding things and do a lot of damage to the inside of your motor. So if you flood one of these, if you drown one, you want to take care of it right away. Actually, when it gets exposed to air after being in the water is when the real damage will occur. So if you have to wait, it's actually better to leave it in the water until you're ready to pull it out and work on it. But really, you just want to get it taken care of as soon as possible. So when I did this a little bit ago, I reloaded everything into the truck, drove straight home, and now I'm back at the station, put on some dry clothes, and immediately started to work on this. So it's been about 2 hours since this thing went in the water. And I'm pretty sure that it wasn't running when it flooded. I had the safety cord on when I went overboard, and I think it shut off before the motor itself actually went in the water. So I'm hopeful that this will be salvageable. So yeah, let's get into it. All we really need to do to get a flooded motor going again is to get all the water out of it. And again, it's really, really important that we get all of the water out because water is not compressible. And so you want to make sure that you do this before you try to start the motor. Do not try to start the motor until you're guaranteed that you got all the water out, or you're going to make things much, much worse. And so the first thing we need to do is to pull the spark plug. Different socket. This engine is a very simple single-cylinder 4-stroke, which makes this quite easy, but it's the same procedure if you have a more complicated engine. You just have to make sure you do this to all of the spark plugs and all of the carburetors instead of just the one that I'm working with. So the next thing we need to do, now that we've got the spark plug out of the way, is we need to work on the other side. And we need to get this air intake, the choke. We need to get that off. Again, your engine may differ, but it shouldn't be complicated. It should just be a handful of screws or bolts, and the choke should come right off. Okay, and so this is the carburetor. I don't know if you can see it, but there is water back in there, which is what we want to get rid of. Now, does this one have a drain? Okay, and so what we need to do is we need to flush this out. Now, I've seen some people just do this next step with the carburetor attached. I really like to make sure that I'm completely guaranteed that I got all the water out. So I'm going to actually pull the carburetor off and drain it out before I try the next step. Pulling our carburetor off of these little engines is usually quite easy. There's usually just a handful of bolts holding it in place. I think it's just 2 on this particular one. It can be a little tight. This one that I'm working on right now in particular, I know from having had this carb off before that it could be a bit of a pain in the butt to get it back on, but it's not too big of a deal. And then, yep, there should be just this guy, one more bolt. That one I may be able to get a socket on. So, those two bolts, there was one down in there, and one over there, were the only things holding the carburetor in place. We do still need to disconnect this piece over here, which goes to the choke, and then, ignore that, a fuel line is right back here. We also need to at least slide off this throttle cable, which should just pop right out. There we go. And then I'll have to grab a pair of pliers real quick. And, oh, you guys can't see what I'm doing. Sorry. I pulled off this throttle cable, and then there's a clamp there for the fuel line that needs to come off. Okay. Actually, need to get the fuel filter off as well, so I'm just going to leave that clamp on, and instead I'm going to take off this one that's holding the fuel filter in place. Don't know how well you can see what's going on in here. Basically, I just have these little clips that I am struggling to get off. There we go. Okay. And so now the carb is free. I've still got the throttle cable attached to it. I don't really want to pull that because then sorry. The throttle cable there is still attached. I don't want to pull it off because then I risk having to retime it, or not retime it, but adjust the cable. I don't want to do that. This carburetor fortunately has a screw on the bottom that will let me drain the water and fuel out of it without having to dismantle the carburetor. You can see there already lots of water coming out of the carb. And that's really what we want, is to get all of that water out of there. But anyway, I'm going to go grab a screwdriver and get that screw out. There we go. Back here a little bit. You'll see I've also want to get all that water out of the fuel filter. Basically, anywhere that there could be water in the system, I want to make sure that it's out. Okay, now we just reverse the process to put it back together, and then we're going to flush the whole system with our good friend WD-40. Okay, and then we need to reattach the choke, and that is just this little rod here, and there's a little plastic piece down in there that it clips into. Don't know if you can see the plastic piece. Okay, there we go. Choke's working again. Okay. Now the next step is really important. We need to flush the whole thing with WD-40. So for this stage, what we want to do is flush WD-40 through the carburetor, which will take it through the whole system, and then it'll come out through our spark plug hole. Because the spark plug is not in, it's not going to have any compression on it, and also there won't be any spark. The engine's not going to try to actually turn over and start. Well, it'll turn over, but the engine won't actually try to start. I'm going to put a rag here because a lot of junk tends to come out when you do this. And basically, all you do is open up your choke so you can get into the carb. Take regular old WD-40 and spray a whole bunch in there. And then you want to just start yanking on it. Spray some in while you're pulling on it, so you really get it all in there. Don't be afraid to use a lot of WD-40, because that WD-40 is going to be what's pushing the water out, because of course it's an oil, so it's hydrophobic, and so that will keep the water flushing out. Usually you're going to start to get a big discharge out of there, especially if there's a lot of water in it. I'm having trouble getting it in there, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to unscrew the engine from its little stand. That way I can kind of tilt it down a bit and really fill that carburetor with WD-40. Keep cranking on a bit. You can see we're starting to get some stuff coming out through the spark plug hole. That white foam coming out of the spark plug hole, that's oil mixing with water. And so that's the goal here, is to keep doing this until all of that is flushed out. So I'm just gonna crank on this for a little bit and keep spraying with WD-40, rinse and repeat until I'm happy that there's no more water coming out of this. It started raining, so I had to retreat into the shop. Basically for the last 15 minutes I've just been dumping WD-40 into this thing and cranking it over, more WD-40, more cranking, until I'm now content that I've got all the water in the system. Really take your time with this step. You can't use too much WD-40. Worst case scenario, you just waste a little bit of WD-40, which is cheap, and that's much better than having some water still in your lines that you weren't aware of. So now that I'm content that I've got all the water out of the system, I just need to put the spark plug back in, put the choke back on, and try to fire this thing up and hope it runs. Two other things you want to keep in mind with this. One is to make sure that your fuel is good. If you had your air cap or your vent cap open when your boat goes over, you probably got water in your fuel tank, and that's going to set you back to square one and possibly damage your motor. So make sure you got good fuel. And then also always make sure that you have water around your motor when you try to start it, because it sucks water up from the bottom as the coolant. And so even if you're just going to run it for a few minutes, make sure it's in water or has one of those headphone hose setups to carry the water through it. So yeah, I'm just going to hook up the fuel. It may take a couple tries to get this thing going, and it's going to run really rough and really smoky for a while because it's got all that WD-40 in it. But hopefully we can get to turn over and get going and be working. Okay, let's give that a try. Okay, that was promising. Said, really smoky. That's fine, that's just the WD-40 burning off. Okay, so I'm shutting it off for a second because it doesn't have any power when I throttle it, but I don't think that's because of an engine malfunction. I think I must have messed something up when I was doing this, because if you can see that cable right there, that's the throttle cable, which is attached to that, and so that should move to control the fuel air mixture. And so when you turn the throttle, that should adjust. And you can see nothing's happening. So that means somewhere in my assembly and reassembly of this, I've disconnected something. So I got to figure that out, and then we'll start this up again. But so far, it's looking promising. So basically what had happened was that while I was putting the carburetor back in, I had kind of pinched and pulled the throttle cable. So down there under the carburetor, it was caught up in a way that it shouldn't be. And now that I've done that, we're throttling as we should be. So let's start this thing back up and see if we can get a bit more power out of it. So that last shot that you saw was my camera not clicking correctly into the tripod and falling to the ground and breaking my lens. It's been a very, very long day. But what I wasn't therefore able to film was that once I adjusted the throttle cable, the motor started right up, ran rough but fine. I was able to throttle it, and basically I just let it run for about 15 or 20 minutes to really burn off all that WD-40 and start going back to running normally. Everything with it seems to be fine, so it should be good. Fortunately, I did not permanently damage it. So now we're going to talk briefly about how I got myself into this mess. Right now, we have a student, master student Larissa, who is tracking these wonderful, amazing, giant Mexican musk turtles. And we have all this gear on their back to be able to track them and to record their activity patterns and temperature and what depth they're at, and we really get a lot of data out of them. But a couple of the turtles have gone missing, and we haven't been able to get any signal from them for a while. And you can see we've got these big numbers painted on the side of them so that we know who they are. Well, earlier I was out releasing some turtles and was motoring back, and I was by myself, which is mistake number one. And I had the 4 horsepower motor on instead of the 2.5 horsepower motor, which was mistake number 2. And I didn't have any weight or ballast up in the front of the canoe, which was mistake number 3. And it was pouring down rain and it was miserable, and so I was trying to go fast and get out of there, which was mistake number 4. And as I'm cruising back, just trying to get out of the weather, lo and behold, beside me bobs up a turtle with a big old number 4 painted on the side. Now, often when these turtles bob up at the surface, we can actually swerve the boat towards them, floor the motor, and scoop them up in a net. And it's a lot of fun, and we catch a lot of turtles that way. But this time I messed up, and I didn't think about the fact that I was by myself, and therefore the boat was unstable. And I was really excited to see turtle number 4 again, and so I turned the boat way too sharply, and I rolled it, and drowned my motor, flew myself out of the boat. And there I am in the middle of the lagoon in big rubber gum boots, trying to desperately grab my field notebook and any other important gear and swim the wreck of the boat over to shore where I can drain the water out and, collect myself and get out of there. Fortunately, no gear was lost. I wasn't injured. The boat wasn't damaged. As you've seen, the motor was recoverable. So there was no harm done in the long run. Mostly I'm just really irritated that I didn't catch number 4 because I rolled the boat instead of getting over to it. But it's good to know that number 4 is still out there. Hopefully we'll see it again one day and be able to actually scoop it up and see what's going on with that turtle. For now, as always, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. Hopefully you don't roll your boat, but if you do, now you know how to save your motor. And if you want to learn more about the actual research that we're doing on these amazing turtles, please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at SFS_Belize. Thanks for watching.